Greetings and salutations, Legionaries. This is General Lance once again with War Room, and we're hanging out here in the Adriatic Sea on my U-boat, and we're joined by, me and Sergeant Barnes are joined for drinks with a very special guest, Lyss Hacker. He's a scholar of Evola, and I personally, I have had brief encounters with Evola. I've heard of him, and I read his Metaphysics of War. I thought it was very salient. And it's something that I think I'd like to know more, and so I invited our special guest on. Welcome.
Great to be here. I'm really glad.
Thank you.
I just wanted to interject a little bit. I'm not really a scholar of Evola. I'm really a big fan, but for this audience, I can certainly play this role. I mean, if necessary.
You're too kind. So, so the interesting thing for me is that when I was reading Metaphysics of War, it was because I was peering into or looking for a philosophy of life that was more, cogent with a martial ethos. And from my personal experience and from the experience of others, and obviously I'm a consummate reader of history, right? And you kind of sense that the military ethos is completely at odds with the zeitgeist of the time, which is obviously bourgeois liberal society, and for better or for worse, obviously the Overton window is shifting dramatically in our time, but only a mere 10 years ago, these thoughts, these feelings, this kind of spiritual orientation was not simply suppressed, it was just completely extirpated, and there's only instincts, right, spiritual instincts that kind of guided me in this direction. And so I guess I wanted to ask you, just to give us a brief overview or overlay of who Evola is, what is it that he really kind of was trying to get at, and why is it that his philosophy is so different from what we're usually used to, like Rousseau or any of the liberal thinkers that we're accustomed to?
Yeah, great. Basically, Evola is born in a really different time, in a way, one way really different, and the other way really similar. So he was born in the late 19th century in Italy. He was born in the what you call bourgeois environment of the that kind of Italy. So this kind of bourgeois world was really in a way similar, but also really different from ours. Basically, this is the world of art, culture. What Evola called the nobility of spirit and nobility of intellectuals, and basically a world which was trying to separate itself from the barbarian past of Middle Ages and everything else. So he was born in this kind of world, and he was basically tried to become an engineer. He served in the First World War, and this is at that point in probably 1918, 1990, and at that point in time, he was basically struck by the existential crisis. This is really a crucial part of Evola's life, and he writes about that in several of his books. And at that point in time, he basically decided to separate himself existentially from this kind of world. He didn't really have anything to do with this kind of Italy. His family also, he didn't really want to associate himself with it. And this is the point when he basically started his journey into we can basically name this direction radically anti-bourgeois direction. So, and this also includes what you actually said, the martial spirit. He was trying to he wasn't a warrior, he wasn't in the military, but he was trying to live what he basically took from Nietzsche, modern life. So that I think the Evola basically this is crucial moment of his life, and from then on he was a writer, but he was kind of a warrior writer, let's say. So and then we can talk about his many books that he wrote and many phases of his career, but basically this is, I think, the overcoming of this existential crisis was crucial moment which defined his life and basically pushed everything in this direction, which is not part of this bourgeois Italy of his time, let's say. So this is maybe summary of maybe focusing on what's most important, let's say, for me about Evola.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, from what I understand, to give the context to the legionaries out there, you know, for me in America, I mean, we haven't lived under a monarchy practically ever, right? I mean, if you've been in America, such as myself and my ancestors have since its founding, you know, we don't have experience with an executive rule, and our experience with the state is almost as if it were the enemy, right? It's something that you keep away. It is a kind of, like, how do you say, an annoyance that one has to deal with. It's something that you don't actively pursue, whether it's a sense of like personal development and career-wise. Also, this there's a very, especially if you read de Tocqueville, you know, there's this ethos that has permaneced since then of basically the inability to command others, right? Because we're basically egalitarians, we believe in X, Y, or Z, and therefore so much is predicated on the interrelationship between men in association being individualistic. But you know, and contrary-wise, you know, the powers of Europe, especially of the Belle Epoque before World War I, you know, before the Bolshevik revolutions and the overthrow of the various monarchs, you know, it was very interesting to me that that was still a very much salient experience of the European feeling, and especially in Italy, where Vittorio Emanuele III had ruled all the way through World War II, and of course he abdicated the throne at the end to Umberto II, much to the detriment of Italy and modern Europe. But suffice it to say that really it's, you know, in America we just don't have an experience of the state, of an executive power, and the sacralization of the state as a positive entity or spiritual force. I wanted you to kind of go into the perspective of Evola regarding the state, and how that differs from liberal attitudes that we're probably more comfortable with or familiar with.
Yeah. So yeah, this is a good point. America doesn't really have that kind of experience, but I have to say that most of Europe, if not all of Europe, and maybe the rest of the world, basically lost all connection to this kind of world. So America is not really the exception to that. Regarding the Evola's conception of state, this really differs quite a lot from both American, basically he would call it anti-state or anti-empire, and Soviet bloc state, the way they conceive their, also from Evolian perspective, this anti-empire. For Evola, I think crucial part of his traditional state is that one crucial element is existence of men who really live what Nietzsche would call modern life, and this means living a life which puts them in the position that they can rise above the material parts of the reality. This is one crucial part of Evola's conception of not just state but the world, basically, and also this is a crucial part of the traditional view of reality. So there is a material part of reality, a physical part of reality, and also there is a metaphysical part of the reality. And there are laws which govern physical aspects of the reality, and there are also metaphysical laws. So the state for Evola, the traditional state, the normal state, the one that really works is the one which contains men who are, or at least those men are in power. Let's say they don't have to be, this kind of state doesn't have to be all men who are supermen, let's say, but there has to be some men, some groups of men which operate on modern life, that they are able to live modern life. And there are two ways for Evola, and this is also traditional perspective, to live this life. This is the warrior path and the path of ascetic, contemplation on one hand, and the absolute action in the case of the warrior. So this kind of state has a connection. So what is the, let's say, crucial part of this kind of state is king, the king of kings, the kind of a man that bridges the gap between, keeps the link between the metaphysical reality and the heaven and the earth. So these are basically big words, and this is typical of when reading Evola. There are big words, and there are, can be maybe interpreted as a sort of philosophy that's really hard to understand. But I think, in my understanding, I try to link this kind of state when there exist men who naturally live modern life. So this is completely different, kind of the antithesis of this approach. This arrangement of state is a bourgeois state where people basically say, why would I live a hard warrior life? Why would I do that? Even if I can do it, which most people can, let's say in this kind of our world, let's say, or the world of last 100 years, why would I do that? Why? What's the what can I get from it? So I think Evola really, this is his definition of state, and certainly part of that is there is a concept of initiation. This is a way to really live this modern life. How do you get a child, let's say, who is born to parents? How do you get him to grow up in a man who will actually live this modern life in a consistent way, and he won't fall. He won't become a kind of normal human being. He will just keep going in this modern life. And there is a traditional law. There's a caste system, the feudal system of Middle Ages is an example of that. So this is a state where exists a real existential difference between men and women. So women, when they get associated with when they find a husband, they basically become part of that caste. Whether it's warriors, priests, or bourgeoisie and peasantry. So I think this is a crucial differentiation in this vertical organization of society. So
interesting. I mean, this sounds very much like Plato, right? Plato's Republic, where there's kind of a caste system, where there's the philosopher king on top, there's the guardians, and so on and so forth, merchants, and the what was it? The average peasants and so on. And the interesting thing to me is that Evola recasts Plato into the modern world, right? He births it into the modern world in a way that we can all understand and conceptualize, because I think the distance of time between us and Plato is 2,300 years, right? And so it's so difficult for us to possibly conceive of the fact that the option is there. It's just that the form has to be retaken or recast. But what I would like to ask you is, I guess, how much of a connection does Evola have to Plato, and how does he differ or kind of agree with Plato regarding this stuff?
Well, I cannot really give much detailed information about that. I haven't really, he doesn't really mention Plato a lot, let's say, in most of his books that I read, but I would say that I also don't know much about Plato, I have to say, but I think he basically, I would sort of generalize your question, sort of reformulate your question a little bit, if you allow. He basically agrees with all of the, let's say, how do you call it, those men from ancient Greece, from ancient Rome, from ancient India, from ancient Persia, from ancient, now it's ancient Europe, old Europe. He agrees with all of them. With Dante, for example, this is the Italian from Middle Ages, a famous writer. He pretty much agrees with all of them, and certainly, I would say he certainly is related to Plato. That's for sure. But I cannot really I cannot conceptually make any kind of analogies here. Evola basically is a pretty much like Guénon. This is a sort of related author, and also we can say that he's a teacher of Evola in a way. He basically is a really radical traditionalist, and in a sense, in this way, he basically agrees with all other men who stand on the side of tradition throughout the Kali Yuga. Let's say that this is the history of the last 6,000 years. So all of those men are on Evola's side. Let's say, I would say.
I see. And could you explain what it means in Evola's terms, what the Kali Yuga is, and just kind of elucidate that for everyone listening?
Yeah. So this is basically something that we get from Guénon. René Guénon is he's born in France in the late 19th century. He's a really famous metaphysician and a student of, we can say, old traditions, and specifically Aryan traditions. This is, let's say, tradition. We can say, I can be more specific. He studied Indian, Aryan India, Aryan Greece, Aryan Rome. He was just a great expert on all of these traditions. So Evola took Guénon first. Basically, I'm also not really. I'm much more familiar with Evola than Guénon, but it's clear that Guénon wrote basically in his works. He based his ideas on the Hindu conception of cycles of ages. So this is the idea that time is not linear. This is completely different from, let's say, American way of thinking about progress. Today is like it is, but tomorrow is going to be better. And in 100 years, we're going to the moon, and we are going to the space. We're going to just be better than we are today. No, this is this cyclical way of thinking about the world is basically that there is a golden age at the beginning. There's a golden age, and then after that, this golden age lasts for, let's say, 25,000 years. Let's say, and then there's a silver age, which lasts a little bit less, and then there's a bronze age, and there's an iron age. And iron age is basically another term for Kali Yuga. Kali Yuga is basically Guénon took this from the Hindu tradition. So this is the age where basically the age where the world is basically left to its own devices, fundamentally. There's no real spiritual authority which basically connects the world with the heavens, let's say. So
it's interesting that you mentioned that, and so much of us, our experience, with religion, with spirituality, and this kind of inability to connect with a higher principle, a supra-individual understanding of the world. It's something that really kind of interests me because, part and parcel of being an effective warrior or soldier is selflessness, right? And ultimately what that means is giving yourself for something more than oneself, to be part of something more than oneself. And it feels like, conversely, in the civilian world, everything is dictated by individual interest, individual gain, and even at the cost of, for instance, of your children. If you can see the boomers who destroyed, our present because they were constantly selfish, or women that don't want to have children because why would you have children? It's just a risk, it's just a liability, it's a huge energy and time sink, it's a legal risk, who knows what happens, and you're liable for a person you don't control. and there's no justification that kind of supersedes the individual interest. And this is something that liberalism, and it's why liberalism is approaching quickly to nihilism. But I wanted to ask you, and to connect this to the state, the concept of the state, right, the true state. Um, if you could just go into any specifics about what Evola would idealize as like the not genuine, but like authentic, organic, and real state, as opposed to the fake, abstract anti-state we have today.
Yeah. So basically, this term organic state is exactly this term he used to describe the real normal state of the world of tradition. So this state is first of all vertically organized. So it's realized in some kind of caste system. It could be the feudal system of the old Europe. It could be some kind of caste system of ancient Greece, ancient Rome. And when we talk about ancient Rome, ancient Greece, they all had their own golden age. So Rome fell in 450 AD or something like that. So it's not, when I say Rome or Greece, it's basically Evola differentiates between the early phases of these civilizations and late phases, which are basically their own little Iron Age when they fell apart. So this state, a traditional state, is vertically organized. We can imagine it like a feudal system of old Europe. This state is not about. Evola talks about the differentiates between subjugation, which is typical theme of revolutionaries. They basically said poor peasants were basically pushed aside. They were forced to do labor for others and everything else. Typical revolutionary talk. Evola basically imagines this state or presents it like this, that peasants were below, let's say, warriors. This is good for them. In ideal situation, this state basically brings everybody upward. So peasant, maybe he's not warlike, maybe he's not living modern life of Nietzsche, let's say. He's not, he's just a normal man working in the field or something like that. But this kind of environment, warlike environment of old Europe, makes him more war ready for, as you said, self-sacrifice, to actually view his life as part of something larger. This is not just him making ends meet just to survive another winter or something like that. He's basically feels that he's not just some part of his village or some small community, but he's also has a conception that this is the other part of this true state, which is the idea of the empire. So there is some kind of larger idea that he's part of, and he's doing his part. So Evola basically said, this is the really good line of his, that a bad king is worse than a good peasant. So if you are in a position that you are in, if you are perfectly executing what you have to do, then this is better than the one who's sort of above you in this environment, and he's not doing his part. And this is the case. It's just a matter of time when things will fall apart, and this is one of the reasons why old Europe actually died. So this is basically the typical Evolian topic of orientation, sort of vertical organization, but not for the purpose of subjugation or forcing somebody in kind of really bad position. So it's all about elevating all of the capabilities and even those material capabilities of peasants. So
I see. And I guess, just kind of just to bring it back, I guess, from the level of the abstract to the practicality, obviously I'm sure you're probably aware of a lot of neo-spirituality, whether it's, in your colloquial sense of like neo-paganism, kind of new age stuff, crunchy granola, or this affectation of Christianity, which is completely at odds with the original sense of either the Catholic or Orthodox churches. And, I kind of wanted you to explain what Evola thought about our time and how we can spiritually awaken when all the, I guess, orthodox forms of religion have basically been desecrated, and they are no longer viable paths to enlightenment.
Yeah, so this is basically late Evola. So Evola, he was really active during the interwar years. He was thinking that old Europe can be renewed in the context of National Socialism and fascism, although he wasn't, never really has been really part of these movements. He had a lot of bad things to say about these things. So your question basically is really relevant for Evola of his late years. This is basically Ride the Tiger. He's really one of his main books, where he basically concluded in the end of his career that, as you said, we cannot rely on the church anymore, whether it's Catholic Church or some other kind of church. We cannot rely, let's say, in the context of the military, we cannot rely on that this military really is a military that our parents or grandparents were used to. We cannot rely on external environment to really provide any kind of support in living a life which is not self-centered and bourgeois in a worst possible sense of the word. So this is this conception of Ride the Tiger is basically that he during this is basically 60s and 70s in Italy. He was living in Rome. He basically noticed that there are men in our times, and not just in post World War II world, but also during maybe whole of the modernity, and because this is the process that lasting for hundreds of years. He noticed that there are men who can actually live this modern life. I'm using this term frequently, but this is what it really is. This idea that despite the fact that your environment is the way it is, doesn't help you. You can do it by yourself somehow. So there are details that Evola gets into. What are the prerequisites for this to be done? What kind of structure, inner structure, this man has to have, and what he has to do in order to accomplish this. So basically, that would mean that you're in the military. The way it is, it's feminized. It's wokeism is part of the everyday life experience and everything else. But you're somehow, this is the extreme example. You're somehow able to still inside of you can still live a real warrior military life. But maybe this is the extreme example, but this applies to everyday life. So he basically crucial part of the structure of this kind of men who can do that. He calls that transcendent dimension. They have the transcendent dimension inside themselves, in their self. This is the term he uses, and they can basically overcome. Transcendence is basically self overcoming. So they can overcome this kind of environmental constraints, and they can still transform that really, really bad situation into something which was normal in a more normal world. The environment was much more normal, and it was much easier to live a life which is not just degenerate and bourgeois, and as I said, in just the worst possible sense of the word. And we can go into details. Maybe this is a little bit, he uses the terminology that's maybe strange and everything else, but he has the solution, let's say. And this is the Ride the Tiger way.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I remember, listening to, or rather reading his various books and over the years, and it's interesting because it talks about every individual, from what I understand, is we all have our own proclivities, our virtues, our vices, naturally inborn. And I mean, Nietzsche talks about how the leveling of society leads to the confusion of various different peoples, and People have equated this to different peoples as in nationalities. However, Evola makes the case in point, as well as Nietzsche, that it's actually the leveling slash mixing of different castes of people, of spiritual castes of people, and this leads to confusion and personal ennui, listlessness, lack of sense of direction. To say nothing, of course, of the fact that our society does not allow for, or doesn't have structured, crystallized forms that one would fulfill, or like roles one would fulfill naturally or normally. And I guess to kind of bring it back, just like I said before, Plato analogously had, the rulers, the guardian class, the merchants, the peasants, as like a kind of stratified pyramid. This is not to imply that one is inferior to the other in the colloquial sense, but there's an ordination of society just as there is an ordination of the individual body. So you have your personal appetites, you have basically your thumos that's in your chest, courage, and you have your mind, your logic. And ultimately, it's the unity of all these dynamics as a team that makes for a robust nation, that makes for a robust state. And I think one of the most interesting things is, like, there's such an emphasis on life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, or life, liberté, égalité. And these are kind of mantras of the French Revolution and the liberal revolutions of the 17 and 1800s. However, we see that it's kind of blank. It falls on its face. It's empty. We had the misfortune of, not simply the birth of liberalism, hyperliberalism, but also communism, which is another form of liberalism, a Jacobin form of liberalism. And, I'll get to you, I'm so sorry, but we see, like, this mass confusion, and there's a lack of sense of direction. And I wanted to ask you, in this real world, do you follow your impulses? Should you, like, does living a heroic life against the times, what does that mean practically? Do we just kind of skulk on the outskirts? Do we hang in the shadows of the ruins? Or do we try and fight? And fight to build the city that we believe exists, that we know exists celestially on Earth?
Yeah, from my personal perspective, I agree with Evola that really nothing can be done in external world. So that doesn't mean that you don't have to fight. I mean, you can choose this path. You can really fight those forces which are incredibly victorious, let's say, since World War II. And I don't really just mean allies. I mean, in general, the world, the anti-traditional forces triumphed completely. So personally, I agree with Evola that Ride the Tiger way is the only way, but the only way to really, let's say, really live differentiated life. So that's why I agree with him. He's really elitist in this book, Ride the Tiger, which he constrains. He puts really tight constraints on who can do that, and these are really men who can really. They have to be radically anti-bourgeois. I think this is crucial. That doesn't mean that you have to leave this world, and this is Evola basically is really clear about that you have to be part of this world, and this is also one of the other constraint of his Ride the Tiger, this differentiated man, the concept of differentiated man. This is the man who is part of this world, but he fights in an indirect way. So this is the concept of Ride the Tiger. It's also the idea from the world tradition. I'm not sure exactly which tradition, probably Indian, where you don't confront the tiger, and tiger is basically all of these intertraditional processes which are who are basically destroying things, including you and everything around you. You don't directly confront it, but basically you open yourself up to all of the experiences. So it could be on your job, it could be in your personal life, it could be anything. All of these experiences, there is absolutely no way you can avoid destruction. You will be challenged by these destructive processes. There's absolutely no way to avoid them.
And if I
but you have to.
sorry to interrupt. I hate to interrupt. But from what I understand in Evola, there are two paths to enlightenment, right? Left and right hand path.
Yeah,
And he says they're
yeah.
both valid in the time that we live in today. Do you mind explaining what that means practically?
Well, he basically thinks, I have to correct you, he thinks, well, there are many Evolas, depending on which books are you reading. If you're reading Ride the Tiger, this is the left-hand path. So this is the path where you basically say, there is no way, for example, there is no way for me to live a fulfilled life, to actually confront these destructive processes by, for example, being a good Christian. There's no way, because Christian church is already compromised from the inside. So basically, priests are fundamentally gay. They're all feminized. Compared to the old priests, let's say. This is just an example. Or military, for example. You can't. It used to be military was a way for men to live a modern life. In a traditionally ordered environment, especially when we talk about the old Europe. There's a special kind of caste, and people will basically completely devoting their life to, for example, some king or some prince, or fighting for him, for the empire and everything else. And later that was survived to some extent in great nations, maybe included America at one point or not. But Evola basically says, no, in this world, there's only left-hand path. This is the only valid, not valid. He basically says the only way to confront this environment in a differentiated way to avoid bourgeois compromises. For example, rebelling against something, and then you basically, when you're 30, you marry some woman and you just continue to live normal life, accepting all of the degeneracy around you, and you just become a normie. The only way to do that is you're on your own completely. You have to basically find inside yourself. You have to open yourself to all of these processes, then use your, he calls it, transcendent dimension to basically actively overcome these challenges.
And do you mind
yeah.
explaining in detail what is, because like we're fish in water, if you can think about it. We all kind of, especially since 1945 and 1991, basically with the end of history in the Fukuyama sense, bourgeois liberal society, liberal democracy is seen as the apex of human civilization, which is, the foundation of which is founded on bourgeois values, mores, patterns of being. Do you mind in detail explaining what that is?
To explain exactly what is
bourgeois? What is bourgeois?
Yeah. So basically, this is a typical term from the Marxist terminology. So basically, this is used to be in the 19th century. There was a class of people. Basically, most members of the bourgeoisie of 19th century were peasants, former peasants in the Middle Ages. So these are people who were great in intellectual endeavors, in trade. They were bankers and everything else. So there was a 19th century caste which took over and also created in the nobility, which basically became bourgeois. This is one of the reasons why old Europe fell. And I would say the way I look at it is that there's the old bourgeoisie and there's a new bourgeoisie, and every communist had their own red bourgeoisie, and maybe from 1970s or something like that, when the sort of consumerism became the norm, especially starting in the United States and in Europe and the rest of the world, we had basically consumer bourgeoisie, let's say. So the way I look at it is that this is the way of, this is all too human, let's say, to use Nietzschean terminology. There's a modern life of warriors and priests, and in general, people who can actually deal with the metaphysical parts of the reality. They are not just focused on limited with the physical parts of the reality, and there's also all too human aspects, the way to approach the reality. So I would say that bourgeoisie is basically or bourgeois way of life is basically this kind of life, vegetative life, this idea that you cannot really, I basically can quote Alexander Dugin. He basically said that bourgeois is a lazy peasant and cowardly warrior, basically. So the kind of man who just cannot deal with you can imagine that they cannot deal with warrior life. They cannot deal with contemplative life of ascetics, for example. But they're also not ready to just work. So they basically have to find their way, and one way of doing that is just to be a maybe stockbroker, speculating on with other things, just playing with other people's money. So, but when we talk about let's say the latest bourgeoisie, this is maybe the ultimate bourgeoisie, the consumer bourgeoisie. This is basically just, you're not even intellectuals, people who basically think that intellect is the utmost value. Not even that. You just say basically base your life on the idea that the one who dies with most toys wins. For example, this is consumerism. It's just accumulation of stuff, and you live to buy things. So this is all of that is situated in this all too human dimension. Inability to confront crucial parts of the reality. This is the way I think about it.
Interesting. And if you don't mind me just kind of interjecting and adding a little bit to that, I think it's important for people to understand what is the bourgeoisie, right? The bourgeoisie comes from the medieval term of the bourg, right, which is basically the town dwellers. Well, the primary form of transaction for town dwellers is effectively, what would I say is, it's basically speculation, financialization. You take the produce from the countryside and you set it up in the markets and you sell it at a profit. And later, of course, the advent of banks and banking and usury. In effect, it's the ability to get something for nothing. I mean, this is the prelude of the boomer. The boomer is the ultimate form of the bourgeoisie. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and like I'm just telling this to the legionaries. And so, what is bourgeois? To be bourgeois is to basically, it's to live for the material things. And what is a material thing? It's your car, your house. A certain comfort. And I think the best way Nietzsche framed this was effectively, he typified the Anglo as shopkeepers and who were animated by the singular spirit of comfort seeking. Now, he called the English shopkeeper nation. I don't know if this is necessarily fair or not, because this is just a modern rendition. It just happened to happen more sooner than later, compared to the rest of Europe. But this is not to say this will be forever, but what I would say is that if you can imagine in your mind's eye someone who's constantly interested in their self-gratification, a kind of Epicurean philosophy of minimization of pain and the maximization of pleasure, with an emphasis on sacrifice and endurance only insofar as it promulgates greater pleasure in the future. Like, for instance, saving towards a house in the future, or saving towards, education, whatever it may be. But as you can see, as the primary dynamic of that soul is comfort seeking, is the aversion to pain. But as I tell you, legionaries, in previous transmissions, and it's a circumspect animus of, the legionary ethos, is to be pain affirming, is to run towards pain. It is to do precisely those things which do not appear to give any material fruits. You have a right to your action, not the fruits of those actions. And to the bourgeoisie, they see this as fanaticism. They see this as a, what would I say, backward, dark ages, medieval, brutish forms of life. However, I think this is quite the opposite. It's primarily when you live for something above you. Something intangible, something beyond oneself. That is when you start to truly live. And ironically enough, not that this is something you should aim for, but ironically enough, when you aim for these things, you almost gather to yourself all the resources and material goods and associations which would otherwise not come to you as effortlessly. I mean, would you agree with that?
Yeah, completely. But I will basically just maybe interject a few comments. Evola, he's really careful here in the concept of ride the tiger. He basically ride the tiger is his attempt to correct Nietzsche. For example, he warns his readers, differentiated men, that yeah, you can strive for these things that you mentioned, but you have to be careful because you are on your own. You know, this is typical ride the tiger way of thinking about things. So you don't have a support. There is no support. Basically, almost everybody around you, are consumers. They want comfort. They want just everything you mentioned. I have to repeat. Basically, this is what Nietzsche did. This is Evola's interpretation of Nietzschean experience. Nietzsche basically tried to live more than life, but he wasn't prepared for that. He opened himself to all of the experiences. He went from one experience to the other, and he was certainly living this modern life, but then he collapsed because he wasn't able to contain these intense experiences to sort of unify them. Evola has his own terminology to really precisely define what he means. So you have to be careful when you're doing that. You have to be, Evola thinks that you have to be special kind of man in order to really do it, let's say, but that doesn't mean that you can't do it to a lesser degree, let's say. So, but to really do it, to really be differentiated, you have to be really sort of be in a way born for that. You have to have this, we call this transcendent dimension that enables you to withstand all these intense experiences. So because you're on your own, that's a Evolian perspective. Yeah.
No, it's interesting because I mean, obviously, Evola, just as anyone else that had any kind of impactful thought, whether it's Heidegger or whoever, has read Nietzsche. And of course, there are many interpretations of Nietzsche. And of course, there's no such thing as an orthodox Nietzschean. I mean, this is something that you have to get out of your mind, right? And it's interesting because I do believe that Evola had some good critiques that are otherwise not referenced about Nietzsche from the perspective of Evola and tradition. And so I guess I wanted to ask you your personal opinion of Nietzsche. I don't know if have you read him at all, or do you feel like any kind of kindred elements in his philosophy towards anything?
I didn't read him in detail, I have to say, just to be clear, but I read him mostly through Evola. I read him before Evola, but I didn't really much understand it back then. But I would say I agree with Evola from my own experience, let's say. So I would say that Nietzsche was, first of all, he was kind of a genius. He was in his discipline of linguistics, and he was really, as you said, incredibly influential for many famous writers of the 20th century and before. But I basically agree with Evola that you cannot. So in this world, in this Evolian and Nietzschean approach to reality, you have to be open. You cannot be closed. You have to, as you mentioned, you have to live this modern life. You have to be open to all of the destruction, because you will going to face some real challenges. As I said, you are on your own. You might have some help. I'm not saying that you're completely on your own. You might have teachers, mentors, whatever. But I would say that dissolution is accelerating. So for people living today, it's much harder than people living 30 years ago, let's say. So it's getting worse in accelerated way. So in that sense, you have to, as Evola said, you have to turn this poison into medicine. I think this is a good way of thinking about Evolian idea of ride the tiger. You have to somehow be open to all these experiences, but not be crushed by them. You know, you have to despite the fact you have to somehow stay the same while transforming. One part of yourself has to stay the same. You have to be stable, unchanged, but you have to be able to go forward.
So
Because
firm in principle but flexible in approach kind of situation.
yeah, because there is no way in this reality things are changing drastically. So yesterday you were in the military, and you were thinking maybe this will be your career or something like that, but something happens that never happened before because of these all desolative processes. Everything people are destroying. All this wokeism could be something new from the left. Tomorrow could be something new. Year from now could be something 10 things, new things that destroy things that were before. So you can't really count on things being stable. There's no way. So you have to, as you said, one part of yourself have to be flexible, you have to be able to transform, but you have to have this part that is doing transforming, and this part has to be stable. This is the way to think about it.
This is interesting because obviously my project is primarily a military science and arts, and I delve into philosophy as a form of buttressing the will, buttressing determination. But one of the recurring themes I have is about war, right? And the central essence of life being war itself. I mean, from a Heraclitan perspective, that basically everything is flux, everything's fire, everything comes and it comes back again, and that time is cyclical. It's not towards a definite end, and therefore it's more about the action rather than the outcome. And what that means precisely, I'll be very straightforward, legionaries. I apologize. What I am trying to say is that it's not about the trappings of war. When people think of war, they think of the warrior, they think of either a spear and shield or a rifle and a camouflage. But you're waging war in every aspect of your life, right? So basically, whether you're civilian, whether you're doing this or that, because it's a war in establishing a celestial kingdom, effusing a certain ethos. It's coming into conflict with the disparate wills of various different elements, whatever vocation you may be in. But the primary element of life, or rather the primary essential quality of life, is conflict, and therefore the warrior ethos is what's actually going to give you the paradigm, the foundation for understanding our reality as such. And Evola has this concept of the legionary, right? If I remember correctly?
Yeah, he's yeah.
Do you mind going into that a little bit?
Yeah, basically it's interesting that Evola was writer for probably 50 years, and he wrote a lot of things, but he didn't really consider himself a writer. This is interesting. He talks about that in his autobiography. He basically considered himself what in India would call kshatriya. He was considered himself kind of a warrior writer, let's say. Mm-hmm. So one of his primary character traits, let's say, but he formulates that in a philosophical way, not just psychologically. He basically, one of the deepest traits of his self is warrior spirit, let's say. So I would say Evola would completely agree with your statement. So this is the recurring theme in Evola's works. We can take example of his view of fascism and National Socialism. He was really critical of them, but he was really, really positive about their warrior orientation. So one of the traits of fascism was trying to create warrior nation, let's say, in a simple way of thinking about it. Not just that, he was positive about other counter-revolutionary movements during interwar period in Romania, some other parts of the world. He basically thought that what's positive in Germany in interwar period is that nobility of the past, especially in the army, still survived to some extent. So, which made things much better than would otherwise be, given all of the confusions of National Socialism. Similar things can be said about fascism. So, I would say that Evola would completely agree with you, and in a way, the way to think about Red the Tiger is there's a lot of warrior spirit in this approach. It's not that you can consider yourself a warrior of, let's say, Middle Ages, some kind of knight or something like that, fighting against latest subversive forces, but you are doing that in a indirect way. So there is a kind of I would consider, right, the Tiger approach, if you would like to conceptualize it, is a warrior aesthetic, in a kind of weird warrior aesthetic, let's say. You're doing it in a weird way on your own, but you are using same abilities that old warriors and priests would use. You're using your transcendent dimension, this ability to overcome the incredibly bad environment around you, but you still live more than life. You're still able to rise above the environment, which is completely left to itself.
Yeah, it's just interesting because, like, the problem of our time is so circumspect, it's so pervasive, and it's, nebulous. You can't really reach out and touch it and figure out what the heck is going on, what's wrong. And, like, it's like a kind of like trying to fight smoke because it's everywhere. You can't grab it. But what I like about Evola is that what he says is effectively this: is that if you're truly an aristocrat of the soul, you will be able to create forms from yourself and impose them upon the world instead of looking for someone else outside of yourself to provide that for you. So it's kind of a philosophy of agency. It's a philosophy of action. It's a philosophy that takes responsibility for the world that you're in, as opposed to resignation. And just like you said, it's not the ascetic in the form of what we'd think of, like in the Orthodox Church, like the Stylite saints, or people who recuse themselves into monasteries and basically cut themselves off from the world. No. This is not what he's saying. He's saying run towards the problem. Live life fully. Be what the bourgeoisie considers extremist, right? That's the famous quote of his. Because it's precisely that's where life is. And I wanted your personal opinion of Evola aside, but like I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but like the heightened levels of depression, the heightened levels of medication, of medicating our problems away, of whether it's outright drugs or it's in the form of pornography or gambling or petty material chasing, such as money or whatever it may be. I wanted your take as far as, like, do you believe this is precisely what Evola is talking about is the problem, as far as, like, this is the wrong path to go forward, is that these are fundamentally indifference, and that you only engage with the world as a spiritual form, just like you engage in battle, not with the purpose of completing the mission, but the true victory is the victory within, come, like, death or success, right?
Yes, completely agree. Evola basically formulates this, exactly what you said, as crucial part of the approach of this differentiated man who rides the tiger. You cannot be reliant on the results of your actions, but you still have to do it. You're doing it, and this is also was known in the world of tradition. So this idea of, we can call it non-attachment. You cannot be attached to the results of your actions, and there is a reason for that, because you find yourself in this kind of environment. But you have to find a way. This is a dangerous path. Just to be clear, this is not a game, some kind of I don't know, your hobby or something like that you can try a little bit, and it can fail. You can fail. But as you said at the beginning of this question, these people living in this world have a privilege. This is what Evola said in one of his older books, Revolt Against the Modern World, and repeats that in Ride the Tiger. Basically have a privilege today to really face the incredibly big challenges, because we are on our own in a real way. So typically in the maybe, let's say, interwar Europe, people who were fighting, it could be on either side, they had some kind of support. Military was still the way it was in the old Europe. There was a church around, and so you had support in this sense. I'm not saying it could be on either side of the warring factions. We have a privilege that we live in real end times, let's say. So this is accelerated dissolution during the last several decades put us in this kind of situation. So we have a incredible challenge, but we also have a privilege to face those these are incredible challenges. So as you said, it's almost like really big, really good warriors are those who are assigned to the really most difficult missions. So this is the analogy, maybe.
Yeah, and I guess to kind of give practical aims as far as what that mission is, right? It's aside from establishing states or governments or forms of social life, I think the most important part, right, is the establishment of a moral order within oneself, to establish the city within oneself, and to act as if, to act in the world with that city within your chest. Come victory or defeat in the real world, or like the material world, it's about, the outward spiritual event. I don't know how you feel personally, but I feel as though pursuing this path of existence, where, obviously it's quite dangerous, disadvantageous, in so many ways, materially, socially can be very destructive. But I feel as though, almost like from that Nietzschean perspective, it's like building your cities on the sides of Vesuvius, and to live truly. And I can't help but feel so fulfilled in this way. I don't know, is this kind of approaching the Evolian ideal as basically pursuing this path through the storm of reality, the inferno of reality, and coming out on the other side with your soul unscathed?
Yes, exactly. I would say that your interpretation is exactly very matches my interpretation of Evola. And Evola basically not just ride the tiger. He was, I think, interesting thing about Evola. He makes it not completely clear, but he makes really convincing hints that he was riding the tiger his whole life, despite the fact that he was maybe flirting with fascism, maybe he was in the secret service of Germany during the Second World War, maybe he was occupied with some other things, but he was riding the tiger, this approach that we are talking about right now. He was doing it his whole life. He was aware that he's living in a world of disillusion, and there is no way he has to do it his own way. And there is as you said, special making these inner victories are really special. So men of the previous times, especially we talk about the last European cycle, didn't have this privilege. There was also challenges, but our challenges are really special. And I would just like to add, yes, we are on our own, and maybe each man has his own battle. But Evola also mentions the idea of Mannerbund, these groups of men, like-minded men, that there's a potential there, he says. At the end of the cycle, these kind of groups, if they're successful, not all of them will be successful, but there's a potential there that these men can really create maybe even something which can survive until the new cycle is started. He doesn't really go into details how will this be done, but they can create something that rises above the individual challenges of the differentiated man. So this is also the other possibility.
Interesting. I guess it's, we're talking about the individual and the ideal of the individual, and something I keep on talking about, how as kind of like a framework for understanding the fight within, right? There's the hero within and there's the enemy within, right? And the way to gauge your actions is by who do you choose to win in that moment, in that action. I guess I haven't had the pleasure of reading The Path of Cinnabar. Have you?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Do you mind giving kind of a synopsis as far as the ideal of the Evolian heroic, or the heroic archetype, and kind of just explaining to us what he holds as an ideal?
Well, The Path of Cinnabar is his autobiography. So this is a book in which he basically goes through his whole career and basically gives hints on how to read his books, and basically gives some meta information, let's say, about what he tried to say in his books. So this is what Path of Cinnabar is about. And regarding the heroism, I would say that you said that you read the metaphysics of war. So basically, I think he's also putting sort of viewing it his through his differentiated lens. He tried to says not all men who participate in battle are heroes. Or there are various ways to be heroes. You know, so he basically is really maybe too elitist in this sense, but there is a way, especially in the modern war. You know, there are many men who participate in this kind of war who don't really want to fight. They're forced to fight. There's very little agency there. So I think his view of heroism is, I would say that he is, well, he mentions the challenges of the total annihilation in the nuclear apocalypse and these wars of machines against men, everything else as a great challenge for the differentiated man, potential challenge. So I would say that heroism in a typical sense of old Europe, I don't really think there's no way wars will be fought the way they were fought before. So we see.
No, exactly, and it's interesting because I'm very much abreast with military science and evolution of the techne of basically battle, right? And whenever I talk to people about warfare, they're always saying things such as, "Oh, drones make war dishonorable. It takes honor away from it." And obviously, Ernst Jünger talks about that too, to a certain extent. But also Ernst Jünger talks about how it's the battle within, and regardless of the instruments we wage war, like physical, actual, conventional war, that it's primarily always a battle within. And it's funny because I was actually reading on Sparta by Plutarch the other day, and about the advent of including let's say bows and arrows and archers and peltasts into the traditional phalanx warfare, which had in the time previously been, a very sacralized and choreographed type event where the armies of the two city-states would come out. The Spartans would have laurel wreaths around their heads and sing songs of victory and happy joyousness. And they would go out to the marker, the border marker, which was a stone, in a very ritualized manner, and give sacrifice to the gods, and they would duke it out, and whoever lost would be go over to the enemy general's camp and ask for permission to bury their dead, to collect their dead, and so on. And this is a very Homeric and spiritual event, which in the eyes of a certain, I think it was, Lyss, who observed the first innovations of war, which of course, like I said, included the archers, the peltasts, the cavalry, that war had lost all honor. And this is a seemingly recurring theme where it's, in the Civil War with rifles, same thing, First and Second World War, later now UAVs and so on, and the impersonal nature of death and destruction. And I am firmly of the belief that if you believe in an eternal metaphysical ideal, right, basically the untouchable world of forms, that no matter what form war takes, that it is always spiritually able to be engaged with, so long as you're able to understand the primary mechanism of existence being something within, just as Evola says, it's about the victory within as opposed to the exact forms without oneself. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, he basically devotes the part of the Riding Tiger to this kind of idea, which he took from Ernst Jünger, from his worker. This is the work from the interwar period. Yes, despite the incredibly, the position of the typical soldier in today's battles, and we can include World War II and all of the wars since then, it's incredibly difficult to. There's so much destruction. There's so much destruction in weapons and all of the today's smart machines, drones, and everything else. But yes, differentiated man should be able to somehow. I would say this is really possible if you really differentiate it. You can really face all these challenges in a differentiated way. You can again transform this poison, which it really is, into medicine. You can. This is an incredible challenge, and Evola. There is a passage in Ride the Tiger. He basically says that this is the ultimate. If you're able to do that, let's say that you go to Ukraine right now and you face all of these drones and whatever it is. I don't really go into details about what they're using there. But if you're able to face that, if you're able to, your parts of yourself, which is unshakable, which is stable, if it stays stable and you're able to transform your individual parts of yourself in this kind of environment, you're basically winning whatever happens.
Right.
You won.
Perfect. Well, Mr. Hack, I gotta say, we have to leave here soon. We have to go back on ops and back to the front and preach to the legionaries. But I guess before you go, I wanted to ask you just kind of a couple of different questions, just as closing.
Okay.
For the legionaries out there, where should we start with Evola if we want to pick up a book? And the second question is, where can we follow you? And because I know you're always posting about Evola and talking about it and citing his less known texts. Where can we find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Substack primarily. I used to be posting on X, but I'm posting. I'm not really. I basically said what I have to say. I posted some essays. It's heavily Evola related. I use Evola a lot, and this is my interpretation of Evola. I think Evola is really relevant today because we are going to face some really big challenges, whatever happens. That's for sure, and it's going to get more challenging. That's for sure, and I think Evola is really relevant, probably more relevant than ever, I would say. So there's a reason why there are Evolians out there, and I think there's in Evola. I think just going back to your first question, there's in Evola. Evola wrote a lot of things. He wrote many main books during his career, and he was basically in World War II. He was injured. He couldn't. He was basically paralyzed. He was in a wheelchair since 1945 until 1974. So during this time, he wrote a lot of things. So there's a lot of topics, and also before the war, he was also writing a lot of things, a lot of essays, a lot of books. I would say that there are many Evolas. I think you have to start with this idea. He was writing for 50 years, and during years which were really turbulent. There was a World War I, there was World War II, there was interwar Europe. All of these revolutions are going on, counter-revolutions, and also post-World War II, where basically communists and liberals took over with their revolutions. So there was really a lot of things going on. I would say that probably the best way to start is his autobiography. Maybe you just don't have to read the details. Maybe just skim through it and basically see what you're interested in. Not Ride the Tiger is not for everybody. Revolt Against the Modern World is a special kind of book. That's a really long book, really intellectually challenging book. So this book really can clear up many potential misunderstandings that you can have by reading Evola. So young Evola is really rebellious. He's pagan imperialism. Later Evola is Evola for the Tiger. There's all sorts of books on inner doctrines, Hermetic tradition. There's books about fascism. There's a book on National Socialism. I just wanted to say that he was not a fascist and he was not a National Socialist. National Socialist is a crucial thing to understand for Americans, especially who were fighting against those forces in the Second World War. So I would say start with The Path of Cinnabar. it's his autobiography, so start there, and you can get a clear outline of his long career. And then you're going to see where you will start. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Thanks for speaking with the Legionaries. And
Good.
do you have any last parting comments? Anything that you wanted to say before you head off?
Well, just repeat. I think we are living in a time where things will get worse. That's for sure. I just don't want to be negative. I think this is again, in the context of what we said about the Ride the Tiger, not just Ride the Tiger, the differentiated man, his approach, but general approach could be some other kind of approach. There's a way to face these challenges, and Evola can help, I would say. This
Nice.
is it.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
No problem. Thank you.
And Legionaries, I'll be adding his Substack into the transmission notes, like I said before. But without further ado, thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Hacker. Lyss
Thanks.
P. Hacker, and
Yeah.
this is General Lance, Sergeant Barnes, in the War Room, signing off.